Rain had just begun to fall when the woman knelt beside the grave. Her worn shawl clung to her shoulders, soaked through, but she didn't seem to notice. Every week, without fail, she came to this cemetery, her trembling hands clutching a small bundle of wildflowers. They weren't much, but to her, they were everything. The headstone was clean, freshly wiped, as if she had been there moments before the clouds opened. "For you, my angel," she whispered, placing the flowers gently. Her voice cracked with emotion, but her expression carried peace, a kind of quiet, enduring love that only grief can carve into the heart. On the other side of the graveyard, a black car pulled up. A man stepped out, tall and sharply dressed, his umbrella held by a chauffeur who followed him at a distance. His shoes sank slightly into the mud, but he didn't care. His gaze moved across the rows of tombstones until it stopped, right on her. He froze. The woman didn't see him. She was too busy straightening the petals that had bent under the rain. The man, Daniel Rourke, CEO of one of the largest corporations in the city, had come here for the first time in years. The grave he sought was his son's. He hadn't been able to bring himself to visit since the day of the accident. He took a step forward, then another, until he could see her face more clearly. She was older than he expected, probably in her late 50s. Her clothes were simple, a little torn, and her shoes looked like they had walked more miles than they were meant to. But what struck him most was that she was kneeling beside his son's grave. He frowned. He was certain no one else visited it. When she finally stood, she turned to leave, and stopped abruptly. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and she instinctively clutched the edges of her shawl. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to intrude." Daniel's voice was low, but firm. "You've been coming here often, haven't you?" She hesitated. "Yes, sir, every week." He stepped closer. "You knew my son." Her lips quivered. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded. "Yes, I did, in a way." Rain poured harder now, drumming on the leaves and marble around them. She seemed small beside him, frail, humble, but her eyes carried something powerful. "Would you tell me how?" Daniel asked softly. The woman's name was Martha Doyle. She worked as a janitor in a nearby hospital, the same hospital where Daniel's son, Ethan, had volunteered before his death. Ethan was 23, bright, kind, and full of plans. "I met him in the children's ward," Martha began, her voice trembling with memory. "My grandson was there for treatment. We couldn't afford much, I was doing extra shifts to pay for his medicine. Ethan would visit the children every day after his classes. He'd bring them toys, books, sometimes he'd just sit and listen. But what struck me most was how he treated me. Like I mattered." Her eyes glistened. "I remember one evening, I was crying in the corridor. My grandson had taken a turn for the worse, and I didn't know how to tell my daughter we couldn't pay for the next round of treatment. Ethan saw me and sat beside me on the floor, right there in the hallway." Daniel listened, motionless. He told me not to give up hope. The next morning, the hospital said an anonymous donor had covered the entire cost of the treatment. I knew it was him. I thanked him later, and he just smiled, said, "The world's already hard enough. Let's make it softer when we can." A tear slid down her cheek. "When I heard about the accident, I couldn't believe it. So young, so kind. I didn't have money for fancy flowers, but I bring these every week. Wildflowers." He liked them, said they looked like hope. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: grief. He had buried himself in work after Ethan's death, telling himself it was better not to feel. But now, standing beside this poor woman who still honored his son's memory, the dam inside him began to crack. He swallowed hard. "You kept his memory alive, when I couldn't." Martha shook her head gently. "You don't need to thank me, sir. He gave my family a second chance. This is the least I can do." Daniel looked at the grave, at the fresh flowers she had placed there. The CEO who could buy almost anything realized how little he had truly given to the people around him, how little he had lived outside of profit, deals, and deadlines. He looked back at her. "Where's your grandson now?" A faint smile touched her face. "He's 12, healthy and strong, wants to be a doctor someday. Says he wants to help kids like him." I tell him about Ethan all the time. Daniel's eyes softened. Would you bring him to meet me sometime? Martha looked surprised. Sir, I want to help him, Daniel said simply. Whatever he needs. School, medical, anything. My son believed in helping people. It's time I did too. Her lips parted in disbelief. I can't accept that, sir. He smiled gently. You're not accepting it from me. You're accepting it from Ethan. The woman's tears mixed with the rain as she nodded, unable to speak. Weeks turned into months. Martha continued to visit the grave, but now she wasn't alone. Daniel often came too. They would stand in silence for a while, sharing quiet stories of Ethan, his laughter, his little habits, the way he'd whistle off key while cooking breakfast. Sometimes Daniel brought fresh lilies, sometimes Martha brought her wildflowers. Together, they made the grave look like a small garden of color and memory. In time, Daniel met Martha's grandson, Ben, a shy boy with bright eyes and a fierce curiosity. Daniel saw something familiar in him. He arranged for Ben's schooling and medical care, never once making a show of it. But one day, Ben asked him a question that stopped him cold. Sir, the boy said, why are you helping us? Daniel smiled softly. Because someone once showed my son kindness when he needed it most. And because the world needs more people like your grandmother. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Ethan's death, Daniel organized a quiet ceremony at the cemetery. There were no cameras, no reporters, just a handful of people whose lives Ethan had touched. Martha stood at the front, holding a bouquet of lilies and wildflowers together. As the sun broke through the clouds, Daniel took a deep breath and began to speak. My son believed that kindness doesn't need an audience, he said. He used to say that real goodness happens when no one's watching. I lost him before I understood what that meant. But today, because of someone who kept his spirit alive, I finally do. He turned toward Martha, his eyes warm and grateful. Ethan once helped a boy he never met before. That boy is alive today, growing, dreaming, because kindness travels further than we imagine. Martha's eyes shone with tears. After the ceremony, Daniel lingered by the grave, staring at the name etched into stone. The years of silence, of guilt, seemed to fade away. When he looked up, he saw Martha standing beside him, her hands clasped. You know, she said quietly, I think he'd be proud of you. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe, but I think he'd be prouder of you. From that day forward, Daniel made it a point to visit the cemetery every week, sometimes alone, sometimes with Martha and Ben. It became less a place of grief and more a place of reflection. He'd bring fresh flowers, not store-bought, but hand-picked. Wildflowers, just like hers. And every time he placed them down, he felt a little more peace. One morning, as Daniel arrived, he noticed someone else had beaten him to it. A small bunch of flowers lay neatly on the grave, and beside them, a note in a child's handwriting. Greater than, for Ethan. Thank you for saving my life. I'll make you proud. Ben. Daniel smiled through the sting in his eyes. For years, he had thought wealth was measured in numbers and success. Now, he knew it was measured in lives touched, in hearts softened by kindness. He looked up at the sky, whispering, You did it, son. You changed more lives than I ever could. The wind carried the scent of the flowers through the air, wild and free. And somewhere between the graves and the clouds, Daniel felt something like forgiveness settle over him. The poor woman's simple act, a handful of flowers, a memory kept alive, had changed everything. And in that quiet place, beneath the open sky, two souls, one grieving, one grateful, found peace together.